This channel's a bit like an old arcade fighting game. We move from the USA to Japan, from Japan to Mexico, and from there we've boarded another plane and we're on familiar ground. Well, to me anyway. Good old Blighty. It's another British wrestling video, in other words. However, a rather legendary Japanese wrestler was on the same plane as me, if you'll forgive me for stretching a metaphor well past the breaking point. One Fuji Yamada. A lot of you may say, "Oh," to that name, thinking that this is some obscure legend you've possibly not heard of. But no, Fuji Yamada is, of course, Jushin Liger, a man who is quite possibly the greatest junior heavyweight in the history of our great sport. You don't even need to know Puro to know who Liger is, seeing as how he's wrestled quite literally everywhere. His home in New Japan, WCW, WWE, CMLL, TNA, ROH, many mega-hyped indie appearances, a multiple-time Hall of Famer. But today we're looking at his younger days. Indeed, a time from before he put on that famous mask and costume, the one from a short-lived anime that his gimmick would outlast by several decades. This video features Fuji Yamada, a couple of years into his career and one of New Japan's hottest prospects, on his foreign excursion in 1986 and 1987, which, for at least half of the time, took place in Europe. He appeared several times on television, the crowds took to him pretty quickly, he feuded with an all-time great heel and New Japan veteran over the heavy middleweight title. In other words, there's plenty to cover both from his appearances for All Star, as well as the odd show he did in Wales for Orridge Williams' Reslo. So burn up with rage, run towards tomorrow, and grab your Liger sword, as we take a look at the UK exploits of a young wrestler who'd become one of the greatest of them all. So, it's not as if Yamada's appearance on British soil was some sort of strange one-off. The links between British wrestling and Puro had long been established before then, with the catch wrestling icon Billy Robinson leading the way. He came to Japan in the late 60s as a master of submissions, much like Karl Gotch, had an all-time legend of a match in New Japan against Antonio Inoki in 1975, and from there you have a pretty solid bond, one that's set even further in the early 80s when New Japan sends another soon-to-be great light-heavy wrestler over to British shores. One Satoru Sayama, who'd come over and work in Max Crabtree's joint promotions in 1980 and 1981, having previously spent 2 years in Mexico for EMLL. Known to UK audiences as Sammy Lee and billed as a much more famous martial artist's cousin, Sayama would quickly become very popular with the live crowds and TV audiences, immediately securing a place amongst the top joint promotions' Blue Eyes, or Faces, and taking on several of the most famed heels around, the likes of Cyanide Sid Cooper, Crybaby Jim Breaks, and even an aging but still hugely over Mick McManus, as well as quite frequently teaming with the biggest star that there's ever been in UK wrestling, that being, of course, Big Daddy Shirley Crabtree. Anyone teaming with Daddy is naturally going to have to do all of the work before old Big D comes in with those almighty belly pushers and the Big Daddy splash, but it's a pretty damn strong spot to be in. Satoru Sayama's British excursion was a definite success, and it set him up perfectly for his return to Japan where he would, of course, be the original Tiger Mask. And hey, he's not the only famous guy to come over before Yamada. Not long after Sammy Lee, British audiences were introduced to his bigger brother, Quick Kick Lee, who, as you can see, isn't actually Satoru Sayama's real-life brother. He is actually Akira Maeda. Maeda was a hit with the British audiences too. He did wrestle in heavier classes, meaning that he's got a bit more battling against the likes of the monstrous giant haystacks, and while he perhaps wasn't quite as successful as Sayama was in his excursion over here, he was definitely well known. Now, in another video, the British fortunes of Sayama and Maeda would be a good prelude to what else is to come in the rather complex relationship between two wrestling legends who have done quite interesting things together, from pioneering new styles of pro wrestling to shoot-kicking each other square in the plums. While we're still on the pair though, I do want to focus on one particular match that Sammy Lee had on March 31st, 1981, as it introduces the man who's going to be Yamada's main antagonist in this video. 'Tis funny, considering how legendary the Tiger Mask vs Dynamite Kid feud was in the early 80s, you may wonder if we had a sneak preview of that in the UK. Unfortunately, I don't believe the pair faced each other in England, not in the pre-Tiger days nor ever. Sammy Lee did, however, face the man who would later be his dark side equivalent in the UK, Mark Rollerball Rocco, the original Black Tiger. Before we even start here, I quickly need to stress that Rocco is one of the greatest wrestlers this country has ever produced, even if his name isn't necessarily as well known as that of, say, Dynamite Kid or William Regals. He's a pioneering junior, one ridiculously ahead of his time, as good as any other British legend you care to mention. The match that Sayama and Rocco have in the UK is relatively short, but utterly packed with action. Even by the standards of British wrestling, Sammy Lee is a whole other level of speed, complete with the jumping soul butts, the moonsault feints, the flying cross chops and all the other tools that would become famous when he put on the Tiger's mask. Rocco, a total heel, tries to ground Sammy as much as possible, but endlessly ends up getting caught out, getting more and more frustrated throughout the first 2 rounds. Even Rocco's most powerful moves seem to have little effect on Sammy Lee. He tries to go up top after a thunderous tombstone, but Lee recovers quickly and Ric Flairs him right off the ropes. Eventually, Rocco's anger earns him a public warning after he drapes Sayama over the top rope, but Sammy's quick to recover once again, flipping out of a suplex, hitting a big atomic drop and tilt-a-whirl backbreaker to secure the first fall in round 2. Rocco's frustration is exacerbated even further and he quickly picks up a second and final public warning for attacking Lee on the ground, and after he counters a Sammy reversal from the corner with a closed fist, he gets disqualified, leaving everyone wanting a whole lot more, because what we saw was simply blinding. This whole thing would have indeed set up a bigger match, one where Rocco's British heavy middleweight title would have been on the line. In fact, that match would have taken place on the undercard of the huge Wembley Arena joint promotions show on 18th of June 1981, the one that was headlined by Big Daddy vs Giant Haystacks, a titanic tussle that was watched by a TV audience of 18 million. However, this bout against Rocco would be the last of Sayama's excursion. A couple of weeks after the bout, he gets the call to return to action in New Japan, where the mask is waiting for him. On the 23rd of April, Tiger Mask will make his debut at Sumo Hall against Dynamite Kid. Of course, there would be a whole lot more greatness from Sayama and Rocco to come, but it would happen in a New Japan ring following Rocco's arrival in April of 1982 and debut as Black Tiger. And New Japan's hiring of Mark Rocco for the role was based entirely around Satoru Sayama's recommendation. It should be noted that Sayama and Maeda certainly aren't the only well-known foreign wrestlers to appear on British shores during the joint promotions days, nor are they the only Japanese stars. Masakatsu Funaki, known as Flying Funaki, appeared for Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling in late 1988, although this came right around the time that British wrestling was taken off television. Earlier on, All Japan 80s mid-carder Goro Tsurumi appeared in the UK as Goro Tanaka in the mid-70s while he was representing the IWE, and we also have Akio Yoshihara, a man who likely had Japanese heritage but actually mainly wrestled in Mexico and was very probably a Mexican citizen, predating everyone with joint promotions bouts in the early 60s. We do happily have a televised Funaki and Fit Finlay match from Reslo in 1989 available to us, and there's even some brief footage of Akio Yoshihara, shot in Barcelona in 1961. Of course, there's also the big connection with Stampede Wrestling in Canada. We've got World of Sport matches from Bret Hart, then known as Cowboy Bret Hart with 2 T's from 1981, as well as Owen Hart having a few really damn good matches in 1987. Oh, and Smith Hart in 1980, although Smith's main action in Europe involved putting on a certain moustache and doing a certain salute during a 1978 match in West Germany as a prank, which as you can imagine went down really well, as it totally wasn't completely illegal. Aside from various folks who came into British wrestling and spent their whole careers here, such as the Hungarian Zoltan Boskic or the Gambian Masambula, we have other well-known names kicking about here and there. A month after Sammy Lee's departure, an American known as the Mississippi Mauler arrived on British shores and would be very successful indeed, starring in high-profile bouts including a 1982 clash with Big Daddy. This is Jim Harris, and he is best known as Kamala, the Ugandan giant. His European exploits came before that famous gimmick, although Lamola is certainly a prelude to Kamala. We've also got Spiros Arion, the Greek wrestler who was a big draw in the States, but was an even bigger deal in Australia, most famous here for an incredible match in 1979 against Colin Johnson where Arion drew nuclear levels of heat and the crowd got rather tasty. And we also have something else that was altogether out of the wazoo. Chris Colt, a name likely familiar to Dark Side of the Ring watchers. Chris Colt, a fully painted up, openly gay and exceptionally violent wrestler who was completely out of his time, popped up in the UK in 1980 for both Joint Promotions and All Star, quickly getting fired from Joint due to drug-related antics, although this didn't stop Brian Dixon from booking him. Colt certainly made quite the impression, as you might expect, the sort of bloodfests that simply weren't done in British rings. However, he never had a televised match because, well, his act was just that little bit too violent for a Saturday afternoon. I can't really hear the dulcet transatlantic tumble of Kent Walton mixing well with some Chris Colt savagery. The legendary exotic Adrian Street may have been quite a vicious character himself, but Chris Colt, at least in legend seeing as we have such little footage of him, is on a whole other plane of existence. Anyway, let's get back to Fuji Yamada so that we can look at as much of his British one as we possibly can. His foreign excursion lasted a little under a year, half of it was spent in England for Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling, and the other half was spent in Canada for Stampede. Even if Yamada was only in the UK for a few months, he made a significant impact at a time when the sands in British wrestling were very much shifting. Of course, when you look at the whole picture, you see that the wrestling is, on the whole, not in a particularly good spot. World of Sport, ITV's programme that showed the wrestling amongst other things, was taken off air in September of 1985. Wrestling was still on the telly, but the time slot would now change wildly, and what you ended up having was a rotational system in which Joint Promotions, All-Star Wrestling, and some 2-bit, much too gaudy and over-the-top operation that's causing massive waves in the States, take it in turns to broadcast on the weekly slot, meaning they're all limited to around about a single show a month, whereas Joint previously had the monopoly on TV wrestling in the UK. In fact, they'd had that for decades. With Greg Dyke in charge at LWT and honing the axe that would ultimately cut British wrestling off the air in 1988, Joint Promotions are floundering all over the shop, still completely reliant on a beyond spent Big Daddy. But Brian Dixon's All-Star Wrestling use their television time cannily to try and build as much of an audience as they can for their live shows, basing their product around a trifecta of pretty damn good big-ticket names. The first and main one of these is the most famous Japanese warrior to ever grace the British rings, a man who is, of course, not Japanese. The original Kendo Nagasaki, as played by Peter Thornley, has come out of retirement to play All-Star's top heel, so accept no imitations. And believe me, there were many, none of which can even hold a candle to the original. Mark Rollerball Rocco is also here, wrestling on British TV for the first time since 1982, when he left Joint Promotions. He's worked for All-Star since then, alongside his New Japan commitments. And speaking of New Japan, we've got the young flying Fuji Yamada, who All-Star are basically going to push as the next Sammy Lee, someone who simply has an utterly staggering talent and is going to blow your socks off. Seeing as how All-Star are basically limited to around a single show a month on ITV, we don't have all the big Yamada matches. Indeed, he only made a couple of appearances on national television. There's several matches that we sure as hell wish we had available to us, but we'll get to that. Still, through a combination of All-Star Wrestling and work that Yamada also did in Reslo, the Welsh promotion run by Orridge Williams that broadcast on Channel 4's sister Welsh language channel S4C, I was able to find 11 UK Fuji Yamada matches on the old YouTubes. And in fact our first two take us from before the aforementioned All-Star debut on ITV, to Yamada's very first night at All-Star, in fact. September 27th, 1986. We have a televised record of this thanks to Screen Sport, the satellite sports channel that was around in the 80s and early 90s, and broadcast a dozen or so all-star shows in 85 and 86 under the name of Satellite Wrestling, just about all of which were taped in Stoke-on-Trent. This particular show is largely based around a one-night tag tournament, and Fuji Yamada's debut sees him team up with Iron Fist Clive Myers, a really damn good veteran grappler and excellent choice of partner for the 22-year-old Yamada, a legit karate black belt and champion arm wrestler to boot. It's not exactly a surprise that Yamada and Myers end up winning the one-night tournament. It is, after all, basically a showcase for them, and they win it by defeating Wildman John Wilkie and the punk wrestler Ziggy Zag in the semis, before taking out Blondie Barrett and Rocky Moran in the final. Yamada puts in a very good account of himself, despite having come here straight from Japan on the day of the show, and the obvious thing. I mean, look at that bloody ring. British rings do tend to be a bit smaller than the norm, but this one's taking the piss. I am wondering if it's the same bloody ring that we saw when we covered UWA Wrestling Rampage. Anyway, Yamada quickly got used to it, and it's not long at all before he's moving with grace, making the space his own. Hell, we even hear him talk a little bit of English before the final, even if it is just to say that he doesn't like mock Rocco. The commentary does mention that Rocco and Yamada have already faced each other in Japan, and that Yamada is after Rocco's heavy middleweight crown. Myers and Yamada both shine against pretty average opposition in the main, but Yamada certainly impresses. One thing that isn't necessarily shocking, but isn't something you really think of, is just how defined Fuji Yamada is. After all, we are all so used to seeing him in a full bodysuit. Here, the young Yamada is chiselled out of granite, scarcely an ounce of fat on him, and it shows in how he moves around, the effortless speed, the handspring elbows, the hurricane ranas. It's great to watch. I wouldn't necessarily recommend either one of these matches for anything other than the curiosity of seeing the young Liger in action, but it is cool to watch. One thing you do unfortunately have to contend with is absolutely stinking commentary, full of every single irritating cliche that you may expect. I mean, when one of the bloody commentators shouts, "Tora, Tora, Tora," barely 2 minutes into the semi-final, you know you're in for an utter ball ache on the commentary front. Happily, the commentary for the rest of the matches in Yamada's one is either A, done by Kent Walton, or B, in Welsh, so we don't have to worry about it again. There is a rather funny moment at the end of the show where Mark Rocco does come in, talks a bit of smack about Yamada, and wishes one of the commentators happy birthday by shoving a cake into his face. We go from there to Yamada and indeed All Stars debut on ITV, their new slot as part of the wrestling rotation. The first ITV All-Star show is a bit of an odd one, broadcast on the 3rd of January 1987, but taped on the 27th of December 1986, and it's from a charity event that took place at the London Hippodrome, which for those who don't know is basically a casino, although at this time it was a nightclub and restaurant owned by that none more 80s lap dancing impresario, Peter Stringfellow. Fuji Yamada's bout is the first to be shown on the new All-Star programme, and once again, it's against Wildman John Wilkie. Again, it is more of a showcase, as is his second bout. Wilkie is a perfectly fine, typical British heel type who resorts entirely to cheating and earns a couple of public warnings, but Yamada soon responds, even treating Wilkie to a taste of his own medicine at points, and ultimately winning following a piledriver and a very nice cannonball from the top. Kent Walton, the legendary voice of British wrestling, does a fine job of hyping him up, making the comparison between him and Sammy Lee, saying that Yamada is supposed to be as good as Sammy, and that if you remember Sammy, well, you know that means he's really good. This first show also serves to reintroduce Mark Rocco to the British audience after a few years off national television, and it features the somewhat odd and often mocked disco ladder match between Clive Myers and Kendo Nagasaki. About that's pretty decent action even if it does have a ridiculous gimmick. Now, the fact that it's a charity show and the venue is a famous nightclub does somewhat explain the disco ladder shenanigans, although it also shows that All Star are aiming for a bit more of a glitzier presentation, with a bit more story and angles going on. A little bit of WWF influence, even if they don't have anywhere even remotely close to the budget, and importantly, a bit different from the joint promotions presentation, which was still very old-fashioned, basically unchanged since the 1970s, 60s even, and looking a little worse for wear. The second match shown on TV, which was actually from the first taped show on 25th of November, is another pretty brief showcase. Yamada takes on Rocky Moran in Catford. This match was shown on the 25th of January, and it's totally okay. There's a bit more proper action, although Moran is still largely a heel that does at least have a decent line in blind choking and gouging, which I always enjoy. He tries to pull off a senton, but misses hard. Yamada rallies quickly and ultimately prevails following a moonsault. What we have here, in short, are two nice curiosities. However, the other two Yamada ITV matches are definitely worth a more detailed look. So we now get to the three Yamada vs Rocco matches that are available to us. One's a tag bout, and the other two are singles. The tag match comes first, recorded on 13th of January 1987 in Croydon before being shown on the 30th of March, and it features All Star's finest quartet of talent. Fuji Yamada and Iron Fist Clive Myers taking on Rollerball Mark Rocco and Kendo Nagasaki, the latter team managed by the ever-gentlemanly George Gillette, in a 20-minute 2 out of 3 falls contest. While the majority of All Stars wrestling did still adhere to the age-old Admiral Lord Mountavans rules that defined British wrestling and demanded a round system, All Star did play with the rules a little bit here and there, and it does help give us a more flowing contest in this instance due to not having the rounds. Fuji Yamada has very quickly adapted to those old Mountavans rules, it must be said, including a great deal of their quirks. Quirks such as the fast counts when wrestlers are down or out of the ring to emphasise the danger of a knockout or count-out. Knockouts are much more common in British wrestling than in any other styles. Or that a pinfall or submission attempt has to be connected to a move that preceded it when the wrestlers were standing. In other words, you can't do a move to take someone down to the mat, break it off, pause, and then try a lateral press pinfall. You know, as you would everywhere else. You have to flow into that lateral press with the move, because attacking a downed opponent just isn't allowed, and that includes pinfalls and submissions. It's an idiosyncratic little point that makes old British wrestling very different, but I think it's something that I saw Yamada fall foul of literally one single time. He's just taken to it like a duck to water. Of course, all of these rules can be bent and broken, which is why we have the public warning system, and Yamada's taken well to that too, occasionally bending the rules himself when a heel's going too far. His team with Myers is pretty great too, as they provide a nice contrast. The funny thing is, while martial arts is a big part of their gimmick, especially with Myers doing the whole ritual routine pre-match to Yamada with the kendo stick, it's Myers who is the main thrower of kicks and the like in the team, which probably wouldn't be what the British audience expected. Yamada did study martial arts intensely, but that came after he became a pro wrestler. His sports background was in amateur wrestling, where he was a national finalist in high school, famously in retrospect losing said final to one Toshiaki Kawada. In short, he is a very different beast to the highly successful Sammy Lee when it comes to their British wrestling exploits. Sayama had an amateur wrestling background too, but really emphasised those kicks in the ring, whereas Yamada puts more emphasis on the wrestling, building up to the explosions of speed and moves that seem to make those tiny rings just double in size. He may not have the costume, but a big chunk of what makes Liger is already there. Even, dare I say, a bit of the arrogance that Liger would indulge in, a little ruthless streak that comes when he takes on a heel at their own game. He's not sarcastically clapping his hands at anything yet, but it's definitely there. Let's move on to talking about this match then. It's been playing out in the background after all. In the main, the teams face each other based on their weight classes, meaning that Yamada goes after Rocco and Myers takes on Nagasaki, although a big part of the story here is that Yamada is very eager to take on the heavier Kendo, although Nagasaki isn't hugely willing to entertain him. Yamada and Rocco's exchanges show two wrestlers who do already know each other quite well. As has been mentioned previously, Yamada's already had a couple of bouts against Black Tiger in Japan, and they went down pretty well. Behind the scenes, Rocco is something of a mentor for the young Yamada, tasked with giving him some extra training here in a new style, making him an even more well-rounded worker. Myers, as mentioned previously, mainly works using his educated feet, and as for Kendo, well, he mainly works using his size, his throat-based attacks, and his tendency to break the rules. Also, he certainly has a presence. Nagasaki is not particularly one for working on the mat, but the sheer aura is what makes him one of the most famous British wrestlers. After bending the rules one too many times, Rocco gets his first public warning after intercepting Yamada in the corner with a closed fist, following that up with a beautiful float-over superplex that would have definitely won the first fall if not for that illegal punch, and Nagasaki gets his first warning after Rocco drives Myers' head into his knee. Myers eventually recovers after Rocco misses a knee drop, then catching Rollerball off the ropes with a sidekick, and after a nice reversal in the corner, Myers posts Rocco and catches him with his special, a butterfly suplex that resolves in a crucifix type pin. This move gets the first fall for the Blue Eyes. Rocco is initially hesitant to get back in with Myers for the second fall, although he soon rallies against Iron Fist, bringing Yamada back in with 5 minutes to go in the contest, getting the advantage over him after a lovely little slingshot knee to the back of the head. At this point, Kendo does feel that Yamada is weakened enough, and he comes in with a big right before dumping Yamada right over the top rope. We get the best move of the match when Rocco and Kendo combine forces. Kendo back body drops Yamada and Rocco catches him, flowing right into a lovely pile driver. This is of course illegal and earns Rocco his second warning, but it's a glorious move indeed, and the damage has most certainly been done. With Yamada completely out of it by this point, it only takes another shoulder throw for Kendo to pin the youngster and win the equalising fall, and this time it's Myers' turn to dispute and say that he should be in there for the third fall. However, Yamada has got to start against the almighty Kendo. Kendo attacks quickly, clubbing away at Yamada, hitting a vicious backhand, proper Archie slap, but Yamada does make a rally with 2 minutes left, countering another throw, hitting a dropkick, and going for the big prize, trying to take off Kendo's mask, as many have tried to do before. Kendo retreats to the outside, but Yamada follows him with a plunger, continuing to rip at the mask, and while an older lady, always omnipresent in the front row of the wrestling, handbags at the ready, helps Yamada back in, a staggered Kendo tags out to Rocco. However, Kendo still stays in to throw a telling chop at Yamada, knocking him down as he runs at his rival, Rocco following that with a huge back elbow from the top. Yamada rallies again with a clothesline, but another run-in is countered by Rocco right into his favoured move, the tombstone, and this is enough to give Rocco and Kendo the third fall and the match. It's a pretty good bout with something of a surprise. What with the 20-minute time limit as opposed to the rounds and the loud announcements about the time remaining, it feels like an obvious draw, but it's Rocco who manages to win the match with around 30 seconds left, keeping up his winning record against Yamada and increasing the gap between them. Which, as wrestling often goes, means that something surprising may well be in the offing. One little note which I've got here, thanks to Wrestling Heritage, which is definitely the most exhaustive and best source for all things classic British wrestling on the internet. On the TV schedule, this All-Star event was actually a last-minute replacement in ITV's weekly wrestling slot for a WWF show that was already in the listings, apparently one where the tape went AWOL. The WWF show would have seen Hulk Hogan take on Kamala, who, as we've already mentioned, British audiences were familiar with as the Mississippi Mauler, as well as an appearance from, wait for it, Outback Jack. Apparently a couple of Grapple fans wrote very angry letters to the TV Times due to the disappearance of this show, unhappy that they missed out on the obviously 7-star Hogan, Kamala and Outback Jack matches. Before we get to the big televised singles bout between Yamada and Rocco, they face each other at a live event on March the 3rd at Fairfield Halls in Croydon with Rocco's heavy middleweight title on the line, and Yamada wins it, much to the delight of the crowd, considering that the heavy middleweight title is basically Rocco's belt, one that he'd held several times since 1977, usually getting it back pretty soon after losing it. Unfortunately, this bout wasn't broadcast on television, which is a shame, but it means that Yamada's the champion going into the big rematch on April 28th at the Lewisham Theatre in Catford, and naturally Mark Rocco's even angrier than he usually is at having lost the title. Happily, the rematch was broadcast on ITV on June the 13th, meaning that we get to see it. Being a title fight, it's 2 out of 3 falls, 15 3-minute rounds, and Rocco's absolutely chomping at the bit, trying to get his hands on Yamada before the bells even run. They don't waste any time in round 1, exchanging chops on the ropes, and while Yamada gets a couple of arm drags to send Rocco out, Rollerball replies with kicks and a suplex, keeping the advantage after some hold exchanges with a clothesline, and trying to get an early fall with an inside cradle, to no avail. Rocco largely keeps the strike through the first round, responding to a hammerlock from Yamada by running him out of the ring, but Yamada strikes back by reversing Rocco for a huge posting and atomic drop, finishing the first round on top. Round 2 starts with Rollerball attacking again, trying a backslide, working the arm and hitting a big hip toss, and we get the first bit of roughhousing as Rocco pulls Yamada's arm in the ropes. Double wrist lock, and Rocco tries to bridge Yamada, but the champ responds, fighting back and hitting a wrist lock suplex. Rocco responds with a headbutt off the deck, we get a nice exchange of flying mares, and Rocco regains the advantage with a blind punch, referee Mal Mason, in his first bout no less, unaware of the shot. Rocco hits a backdrop, another mare and a knee drop, staying firmly in control and locking in a cobra twist. In a very cool moment, Rocco shouts, "Come on now, Mr. Inoki," seeing as he's using one of the great Chin's favourites, and happily Kent Walton on commentary picks up on it, while Yamada reverses into a cobra twist of his own just as the bell rings, things getting tastier when Rocco flips Yamada after the bell. It's always nice to see moments from the old days that show wrestling matches not simply existing in their own vacuum, calling out people from elsewhere. Round 3 now, and Yamada kicks off hot, running Rocco to the ropes and hitting a lovely handspring elbow, following that with a great snap brainbuster and a huge elbow drop off the top. Thanks to the smaller ring, Yamada looks like he absolutely flies the whole length of it to strike at Rocco's sternum. Rocco has to exit briefly, the front row naturally mocking him, but he kicks back at Yamada on his return. However, when he tries to go up top, Yamada quickly chucks him off. Yamada misses a knee drop, letting Rocco back in with some stomps and kicks, and then, with a shout of, "Watch this, Choshoriki!" he picks the legs and locks in a scorpion deathlock. Old Kent doesn't pick up on this, seeing as he doesn't really know the hold, although to be fair this may possibly be the first time the Scorpion's been seen in a British ring. Again, it's a lovely little moment, and Rocco's jaw-jacking to the crowd, to New Japan bossmen who aren't here, and mainly to the referee and Kent Walton, remains imperious. But still, Yamada doesn't quit. Rocco keeps attacking the legs, this time with a smart flying mare right into the bottom rope and a knee breaker, as well as an awesome drop toe hold. Even a simple move like that looks so rapid and vicious in the hands of Rollerball, and he holds a deathlock in right as the bell rings, going out to talk more smack with the crowd and even pick up Yamada's belt to pose with it. It was undoubtedly his round and he's rather happy about it. Round 4 starts with Yamada trying to get back in, but Rocco hits another blind punch and more kicks, continuing the brutal workover with holds, the point of the elbow, and palms right to the nose. It's all Rocco as he runs Yamada in, and even though the champ beats him to the punch once, Rocco does the same with a kick, followed by a swinging neckbreaker. Rocco applauds himself and looks to run Yamada in again, but this time Yamada counters with a go-behind, hits a German suplex out of nowhere, and gets the first fall. Sure, the count from Mal Mason was kind of an odd one, but you don't really get big mat slaps for pinfalls in British wrestling. In any case, Yamada leads 1-0 after pinning Rocco in 1 minute 45 of the 4th round. Rocco takes as much time as possible to recover for the start of round 5, Yamada pressing the advantage with the point of the elbow, following with a hangman's neckbreaker and headbutt. Still, the former champ claws it back. When Yamada tries his Yamada special rebound crossbody off an attempted post-in, Rollerball dodges, following it with a run-in and a kitchen sink. More knees and open hand shots from Rocco, and he looks for the Cobra twist once again, cinching it in pretty hard, but to no avail. Rocco is keen to show that Yamada's fall was a fluke, chucking the champ through the ropes and gesticulating to the crowd, but Yamada responds with a shoulder to knock him back and a big missile dropkick from the top. He then tries to attack Rocco in the corner, and a pretty clear punch from Rollerball earns the challenger his first public warning. Not that he cares. Yamada dodges Rocco in the opposite corner, now throwing kicks at his legs and, well, let's say that first fall sure doesn't look like a fluke right now. Still, the round ends with an incredibly frustrated Rollerball kicking Yamada and throwing him out again. Right as round 6 begins, Rocco devises a plan. With the ref concentrating on Yamada, he undoes the turnbuckle padding. The ref doesn't spot it, and Yamada ends up posted right into the exposed buckle, with several more to follow. Rocco tries a Canadian backbreaker, and to his credit, Yamada doesn't give in despite the damage, but he gets caught with another big clothesline from Rollerball. The crowd is understandably furious, but Yamada gives them something to cheer with a dodge off the ropes and a big body press. Rocco just kicks out, lands a strike of his own off the ropes, and capitalises with a butterfly suplex, floating over and, much to the chagrin of the crowd, getting the equaliser. Mark Rocco wins the second fall in 1 minute 08 of the 6th round, and mainly thanks to his underhanded tactics he's got a pretty big advantage as we head into the decider. We start round 7 with Rocco once again taking Yamada to ground, using a face lock, or rather the Grovit as it's often called in British wrestling. If you didn't know that, Rocco's happy to call it out himself, shouting, "That's a Grovit, Walton, in case you didn't know," to our humble commentator, who tries to make out that Rocco's not talking to him, even if he is staring at him. Kent Walton is a fabulous commentator, by the way. Rocco keeps the strike by snapping Yamada's neck on the top rope, chasing it with more nasty slaps. But Yamada tries to rally, dodging Rocco in the corner and getting a bit of revenge with post-ins and head slams of his own. A dropkick sends Rocco out of the ring, and Yamada puts it all on the line, going for the big plancher. He hits it, but it seems to expend his final bit of energy, and Rocco, madder than ever, hits another closed fist followed by a run into the post on the apron. Yamada blocks a second and tries for a missile dropkick, but Rollerball evades it, and things look bleak. Rocco drapes Yamada over the ropes hard, the ladies once again braying at the cheating challenger, but Yamada makes one last push, countering a suplex off the apron and trying the German suplex again. We get several go-behinds before Rocco locks on the ropes, sending the champ backwards, and finally he goes in for the kill. He scoops Yamada up, hits his signature jumping tombstone, and that's all she wrote. Rocco gets the third and deciding fall in 2 minutes 15 of the 7th round, the contest lasting 17 minutes 08 in total, and naturally he is very happy about it, jumping for joy even, getting on the mic saying that once again he's proved that he's better than all of those Japanese boys. He's done that over in Japan, and he's done it here, and also saying that he's going to beat Yamada up even more the next time he sees him just for getting his belt dirty. Isn't Mark Rocco brilliant? Of course he is, and so is this match. A fantastic bout between two truly great wrestlers. Fuji Yamada absolutely showing all of the goods, even if this is a couple of years before he picked up that Liger sword. Rocco may act like the cock of the walk, but in the end he was desperate enough to cheat like hell in order to get that belt back. The action with the exposed turnbuckle was the turning point of the whole contest, Yamada basically always behind from that point, although he did almost manage to eke it out at a couple of points. This is of course just one of many legendary matches that Rocco had on his home turf. There's many other great contests against the likes of Dynamite Kid, Johnny Saint, Marty Jones. Really, if Mark Rocco is in the ring, you don't need to do much in the way of Steiner math. There's a 100% chance that the match is going to be a bloody good one. And as for Yamada, well, he's only 22 here. Mark Rocco only has a couple of years left in his career, while Yamada's got over 3 decades to go. But this match alone just shows how damn good he was already. Just like Sammy Lee before him, the sky's the limit. The clashes with Mark Rocco are of course the main attraction of seeking out the young flying Fuji Yamada's bouts in the UK, and we do still actually have one more bout to look at. However, it's for a different British promotion. We'll get to that shortly, but I should quickly mention some other Yamada matches that are on the record, but unfortunately weren't on television. There are other meetings against Rocco, of course, including another tag bout where Yamada was paired up with an 18-year-old Steven Regal, getting the win against Rocco and Chris McNeil. That would certainly be a curiosity, but the real clashes that we sadly miss out on are the singles bouts he had against one Dave Fit Finlay. The then 29-year-old Belfast bruiser, often accompanied to the ring by his wife and fellow wrestler Princess Paula, was already fantastic, a third-generation grappler essentially built for the ring from his conception. Much like Rocco, anything he does in the classic British wrestling years is well worth watching, and I imagine that Yamada vs Finlay would have been as good as the Rocco bouts. What a shame that we don't have a record of at least one of them, although the pair would end up clashing in New Japan in the early 90s. From here, however, we leave All-Star Wrestling behind for the moment and head over to Wales, where we actually have 5 more Fuji Yamada bouts that took place in Reslo. Importantly, this gives us another chance to see the young Yamada taking on Mark Rocco, this bout happening in Carnarvon shortly after the All-Star match where Rocco got his belt back. Interestingly, the ref's role here is taken by Brian Dixon himself, All-Star's head honcho. We're pretty much straight into the action. Certainly no handshake as Yamada shoves Rocco before the bell, and Rocco starts by going straight into clubbing blows. We go from here into a rapid fire run of all the great things Rocco and Yamada have done together. Yamada responds with great tilt-a-whirl and pendulum backbreakers, both of them try pinning combos including a backslide and crucifix, and Yamada keeps control for the first half. We've got a half crab, countering a shoulder throw with a drop kick, and the big plunger to the outside. However, Rocco is able to block said plunger, taking control. Rocco gets rough with a head slam on the announcer's table, but Yamada gets rough himself, picking those legs, dragging Rocco to the corner, and pulling him into the post with enough force to turn Rocco into Aled Jones. Naturally, this earns Yamada a public warning, but it's fair enough considering all the crap he's had to put up with from Rollerball. Rocco replies with a full Nelson and is able to dodge when Yamada breaks and tries for the body press. He runs Yamada in on the apron, but Yamada blocks the second attempt, chopping Rocco away and hitting the big missile dropkick. Another dropkick attempt is evaded and Rocco goes for a Canadian backbreaker. Yamada escapes and ducks a clothesline to hit one of his own, neither wrestler able to get any kind of advantage. However, when he tries another run-in, he is scooped and hit with the tombstone. However, Yamada kicks out this time around, not quite beaten yet. Rocco presses the advantage with a nice drape over the ropes, straight into a suplex back to the ring, floating over for another near fall. Rocco shouts, "He's all mine!" But another suplex attempt is countered and Yamada hits a backdrop, both wrestlers rearing now. Rocco buys a bit more time by throwing Yamada through the ropes. Once again Yamada blocks the run into the post, but this time Rocco is ready for Yamada. He intercepts him on the top rope and after a struggle hits a great top rope superplex, but then misses a running somersault senton. Rocco is still hanging on to control, hitting forearms to Yamada on the ropes, but an attempted posting is countered by the Yamada special body press. Rocco kicks out, but gets running again and hit with the handspring elbow. Yamada following that up with a great stalling pile driver, he hits another body press off the top. But again, it's not enough. Rocco counters another run-in with a kick, goes for the suplex, and both of them end up sprawling over the top rope in amazing, incredibly brutal fashion. And with that, neither man is able to get back into the ring in time, the end result here being a double count-out in around 8.5 minutes. This was a joy to watch, just as good as the All-Star match, and a truly fantastic sprint contest. You have simply got to love watching this pair going at it, because they go hard. Some say that the old British style can look a little bit weak. Mark Rocco would be the main person that I would use to counter that, and Yamada is a great partner for him because he goes just as hard. Go watch this. The other 4 Yamada-Reslo matches aren't as significant, but I will quickly run through them. I am not fully sure on the dates for most of these bouts, but this one here, against the mighty Chang, happened on May the 2nd, 1987 in Amluk on the island of Anglesey. Unsurprisingly, the mighty Chang is not of Asian descent, but he is in fact a veteran grappler, better known to grapple fans as either Crusher Mason or Duke Lynch, a big power heel who just on size alone is going to give Yamada a tough time. Indeed, Yamada's got to fight from behind a lot here, whether in the classic power moves, the bear hugs, nerve holds and the like, taking the opportunities when he gets them to launch big attacks from all angles, missile dropkicks and the like. Still, Chang can cheat too. One cool thing he does is a blind rake on Yamada's forehead using his belt buckle, which isn't something you see every day. When we get to the third round, Chan is still using that belt in various ways, clearly holding some sort of international object in there to stab and slash at Yamada's back, and ultimately this is enough to get Chang the first fall, Yamada submitting to a Canadian backbreaker. But just when Chan appears to be in total control in round 4, pounding away in the corner, Yamada counters a run-in by hooking the big man up with a sunset flip to get the equaliser. We get to round 5 and Chan, well, he decides that he is going to settle the decider his way. We don't have any salt to purify the win, but Chan decides to get into a sumo ready stance. Yamada follows suit and, well, clearly utterly insulted, catches him out with a dropkick and double boot scrape, before sending Chan absolutely flying out of the ring and hitting a huge dive from the top to the outside. Yamada is utterly aggrieved by Chan's attempt at sumo, twatting him with a chair, and in the midst of all this palaver, the match is called. Another double countout, I believe. This was quite fun despite the big differences. The ending was amusingly silly, I liked all the sneaky belt buckle action from Chang, and Yamada is still working great even against a totally different proposition to Mark Rocco. As for the other matches, we've got another match against Rocky Moran that took place in Denbei. This is a pretty quick affair that Yamada takes control of after some Moran roughhousing, paying back in kind with a leg drop that misses both of Moran's legs. From there, the handspring elbow, a pile driver, and the cannonball off the top seal the deal in a similar vein to their All-Star match, and the mighty Chang comes out to jawjack at Yamada after the bell. Presumably this sets up the match between them that we just covered. As for our final 2 Yamada-Reslo bouts, well, it's an odd thing. We're actually jumping forward 2 years. Fuji Yamada makes 2 more appearances on Reslo TV shows in 1989 on the 14th and 15th of March. Not only is this well after his main foreign excursion, but it's a month or so before Yamada makes his debut as Jushin Liger. Now this provides clues as to why. Yamada was purposefully being kept off of New Japan shows in preparation for his Liger debut, so one assumes that Yamada returned to the UK in order to stay match fit, appearing once again in both Reslo and All-Star. Alas, All-Star didn't have television at this time, but at least we've got Reslo. Also, he's accompanying Masakatsu Funaki, or Flying Funaki as he's known over here at this time, who is on his own foreign excursion, and as mentioned before, we happily have a televised match between Funaki and Dave Finlay to show for it. Although, as history has it, this is an excursion that ends abruptly when Funaki makes the decision to jump ship to the newborn UWF, following his trainer and mentor Yoshiaki Fujiwara to Akira Maeda's new setup. Anywho, Yamada has singles matches against vicious slaphead heel Skull Murphy and vicious slaphead heel Sean South, better known as Johnny South. Both of these guys are pretty well seasoned with around 20 years of experience apiece, and Johnny South would later be the Legend of Doom, one of the more popular acts in the old American wrestling tribute business. He certainly looked the part, at least. If Road Warrior Hawk had been a famous actor, Johnny South would have definitely been his stunt double. Neither match is in any way essential, but Yamada wins them both. He gets a disqualification victory against Skull Murphy after the heel cheats way too much, exposing the turnbuckle, using foreign objects and all sorts, and while Sean South naturally tries plenty of roughhousing in his bout, Yamada's got the answer for it all, eventually securing the victory with a body press off the top. With that, we finish our look at Fuji Yamada's work in the United Kingdom. He goes back to Japan, he picks up that Liger sword, and the rest is history, one of the greatest of all time. One postscript here is that Liger, his legend by now utterly secure, would make a return to his old All-Star stomping grounds in 2014 for a match against Robbie Dynamite in Croydon at Fairfield Halls, the same venue where he won that heavy middleweight title in 1987, and the almighty Brainbuster is enough for him to secure another victory here. That's a nice way to put a bow on things, but I actually want to close out with a bit more of a word on Mark Rollerball Rocco, someone who really should be better known. There are happily other chances to see Rocco taking on Yamada in New Japan, including a couple of matches in 1989 and 1990 where the original Black Tiger took on Jushin Liger. Unfortunately, this was right at the end of Rocco's career. While he was a definite veteran with 20 years of in-ring experience, he was still only 39 when his career came to an end, collapsing after an early 1991 match in Worthing against Fit Finlay. Afterwards, Rocco was diagnosed with a severe heart condition that forced him to retire from the ring, although he would continue to be active in the scene, overseeing a tournament in 2003 for his old heavy middleweight crown that would be won by American Dragon Bryan Danielson. Sadly, Mark Rollerball Rocco passed away on the 30th of July 2020 at the age of 69 following a lengthy battle with dementia. His legacy undoubtedly making him one of the greatest British wrestlers there has ever been. If there is one thing that you take from this video, it's that you should seek out and watch basically every rollerball match that you can. You most certainly won't regret it. But before you do that, I will hope that you enjoyed this video, and until the next time, bye for now.